everyone, welcome to Waterbear Reads. My name is Heather. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to September! Oh, it's September and my son is back in school, so I am now recording at a decent hour. I have my sunflower mug here that I'm really loving. We had a pretty wet and cool summer. Finally, the sun came out the last 2 weeks of summer and the sunflowers are out and the hydrangeas are in bloom and blueberries are ripe for picking and apples are coming too. I'm excited for that. So I know everyone's sort of in fall mode, but I just thought I would capture this beautiful time in September when the seasons are kind of in between summer and autumn. We still get some beautiful blooms right now at this time of year. In fact, I like to call September the autumn spring because the weather cools down and all these beautiful blooms come out. We enjoyed our final week of summer. We went down to the coastal Maine botanical gardens and saw a ton of beautiful flowers, the dahlias and the hibiscus and the hydrangeas. I love it when the hydrangeas have developed that pink tone. They're white, but over time become pink and like a deep rose. I really enjoy that. And we saw tons of frogs and we even saw a little snake, but I didn't get him on camera, unfortunately. And then we also went to our local wildlife refuge and did some canoeing. And that's when I got a little bit of taste of autumn because I saw as we were canoeing, there was tons of fallen leaves and some of the trees had already started to turn alongside the river. So that was lovely. And yeah, we went blueberry picking and we just had a lot of fun with friends. And yeah, so I hope you're doing well. I hope you're enjoying September as well. And I am on here today to record my very favorite type of video that I like to record, and it's what I started off this channel with. It's my Read a Book by the Decade video where I show you guys some of the books that my son and I read out loud. They're all illustrated children's chapter books. And for example, we'll read one from the 1800s, and then as we go through, we'll end with the most recent publications from the 2020s. We have a lot of fun doing this. We've been doing it for years now, so I have lots of lists to share with you. And today I thought I would give a bit of a autumn vibe to our list. Titles that I think would really work well to read in the autumn months. So grab your cup of coffee. I've got my coffee here. I've got my slice of blueberry cheesecake. And I hope you enjoy this video. So written in 1819, we have Rip Van Winkle. I read this to my son last year and it turned out to be a great read for around the elections because it's set during the 1770s, right before the American Revolution, and elections are starting to happen and people are getting used to voting. And it ended up being kind of a really cool history lesson. We have Rip Van Winkle, who is living in the 1770s before the American Revolution, and he is extremely helpful and wonderful to the other villagers, and he's always doing chores for them. But at home, he's rather lazy and he doesn't really do anything at home, and his wife nags him all the time. And one day he goes for a walk and he comes across a group of very strange men. They are dressed in Dutch clothing and they're a little smaller than the average person. And he joins them in libations, and what do you know, he wakes up 20 years later and he is old and the American Revolution has taken place, and he goes out into the world and finds people that he knew before he fell asleep. And it's just kind of a fun story. Like I said, I found a great value in it just from the history. And it was very short, and it also moved along really well. It was easy for my son to understand. There were one or two phrases where I had to kind of explain what was meant by it, but other than that, it was a really quick, easy read. I chose this old version, which is as old as Rip Van Winkle. I actually found it in a book box, but I was quite happy with it because it's illustrated by Frances Brundage, who is an illustrator who you've seen her work, but you don't know you've seen her work unless you're a fan of Frances Brundage. She makes all those really wonderful, cute holiday cards of cute kids, and She's also illustrated a ton of children's books, and she's just a wonderful illustrator, and I really liked her illustrations. I thought this book was illustrated on every single page, so I thought that was really great. So there's one of them. That's his unhappy wife, poor thing. And then here's the village when he wakes up again a bit later. It is an old one. It was written in 1819, but it's an easy one to read, and especially wonderful to read in November. So published in 1900, we have The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. This was one of my son's favorite books, and as soon as we finished reading, I had to reread it all over again for him. And the first time we read this vintage version from my grandparents' house, illustrated by Russell M. Schultz, and it's just really sweet. I love The Wizard of Oz. It's also one of my stepmother's favorite books, so much so that my siblings and I pulled together and purchased the Folio Society version for her, illustrated by Sarah Ogilvie, and I'll put some footage here so you can see. We went down to Texas this summer, and while I was there, I took some footage of some of the interior for you, so here's a little bit of it right now. But anyways, I love this story so much. It has so many elements and themes that just reverberate with children. First of all, each land has a different color. I think that really appeals to children, the camaraderie. But I think what I like the most about it is that every single one of the characters is looking for something that they already have. The Tin Man's looking for a heart, and he's already the kindest person that you could ever meet. The Scarecrow's looking for brains, but he's already so clever. And the Lion is looking for courage, but he's enormously brave. And of course, Dorothy is trying to find her way home, not knowing that the entire time she had the ticket with her silver shoes. Let me show you a couple of other versions, but real fast, just so you can see the interior of this one. Some of that. But that's the Russell M. Schultz. And we read that one twice. And then when he wanted to read it the third time, I picked up the Michael Hague version. And I love Michael Hague's work, but I think that of all of his classics, there's two that really stand out to me, and that's The Wind in the Willows and The Wizard of Oz. It's colorful, expansive. Look at those daisies. Whenever I think of The Wizard of Oz, I just immediately think of sunflowers. I'm not really sure why, because I know that there's poppies. Maybe it's because the Scarecrow was found in sunflowers. I'm not sure. So yeah, this was the second one that we read, illustrated by Michael Hague, and there's a new edition that came out for the 100th anniversary edition. I'll put a picture of it up there. So I wanted to show you the original because the original was kind of wonderful and surprising. When I was looking through this version by W.W. Denslow, that's William Wallace Denslow, I was really surprised and amazed. I just loved it. I mean, first of all, here is my son's very favorite picture. He used to stare at those feet coming up from the house. It was just, he was just loving those. I love this. I thought it was kind of cool for autumn to show you guys with the crows. Every section of this book has a different color for whatever land that they're in. So like when you're in Kansas, you have the muted brown. Then you go to the land of the Munchkins and they're blue. And then you go through the poppy field and you have this orangey peach color. You get to the Emerald City. Let me show you this one right here. You get to the Emerald City and you're in green territory. There are some color plates in here as well that are really cute, but I have to say I actually just enjoyed the one color drawings that are set amongst the text the most. I thought it was splendid. When Baum first wrote the story, he called it the Emerald City, and I was reading about how the publisher refused to publish it with that title because there was sort of a superstition that any books that were published with jewels in the title just did not do well. They're destined to fail. So that's very interesting. It kind of makes me think, I wonder why. Now that I think of it, I don't know of tons of books that have jewels in the title. But yeah, so if you're wanting to just stick with the original illustrations, this is actually a really great option. And I have two more I wanted to show you. I did an Illustrator Explore of The Wizard of Oz, so I thought I would just show you a few. Some of them I gave away already, but some of them I still have. And this one is by Michael Sieben. And I wanted to show you this one because I think it has these wonderful Halloween vibes going for it. Like the original, I don't know if you can see that, but every land has a different color, so I like that a lot. And then it's got a beautiful, cute little embossed bit here with the brains, the courage, and the heart. And that I thought was really lovely. I don't know if you can tell there. My son's favorite illustration. This one of the Emerald City as they approach. I think this one might be out of print, so I'll have this one on my website. So there's that one. Just recently came out, not too long ago, and that's of course by Mina Lima. Mina Lima is publishing some beautiful books right now, and I love their classic series. And this one is gorgeous. Also did the same thing as the original, where every area has a different color. I liked this title page illustration because it showed the browns of Kansas, and then out the window you have all the blues of Munchkin Land. So inside this you can pull out these glasses and you can put the glasses on so that when you go to the Emerald City, everything looks green right now. It's wonderful! When Dorothy is clicking her heels together with the silver shoes, I thought that was really cool. I love this illustration at the end because it's all in color, and she's home, and it's so beautiful. Wonderful Wizard of Oz can really tug at your heartstrings, especially when Dorothy is bidding her friends goodbye. In my last Jungle Book vlog, I talked about how when Mowgli says goodbye to Kaa and Bagheera and Baloo and Grey Brother, it's very emotional, and I guess it's just sort of my thing. But that also makes me cry in this one too, because when she's saying goodbye to the Cowardly Lion and the Tin Man and the Scarecrow, it's just the same thing over again. Anyway, so yes, I highly recommend The Wizard of Oz. It's really an easy book to read. It flows quickly, the action goes on and on. There's not a ton of things that you have to explain. Because I'm recommending it for younger kids, I just should mention that there is a couple of times when the Tin Man gets rather violent with some dangerous creatures. So like, I think the first one is like a tiger-lion mix that I'm forgetting the name of what they're called in the book. But anyway, he basically kills them with his axe. And then a second time is when, oh gosh, when was that other time? Oh, like there's some wolves that attack them. He does the same thing with them. So yeah, there's a bit of violence in that. And then I suppose the Wicked Witch can also be rather scary. So do keep that in mind. I just want to say that the movie is very similar to the book, but there are some differences. So for example, Dorothy's slippers are not ruby, they're silver. And Glinda the Good Witch doesn't just appear at the end, where you would normally find the end of the movie. There's actually much more in the book. Dorothy and her friends have to travel to find Glinda the Good Witch in her country. So they have to go through this dainty China country, they have to go through this scary forest, and they have to go through this land of the Quadlings, which are these really strange accordion-necked head creatures. I'm not really sure what they are. But anyway, there's also backstory. So there's a little bit of backstory about from the Scarecrow and then from the Tin Man as well. There's so much more than the movie in this book, and it's just a fun, lovely read. We had such a good time reading it. So now we are in the 1910s, and published in 1917 is Knock 3 Times by Marion St. John Webb. And this one is not illustrated. There's one illustrated version. If you go onto Internet Archives, you will find the illustrations that normally go along with this book, because I found that the illustrated books were a little hard to get, or I think a little pricey. So I just went ahead and read this one while looking on Internet Archives for the illustrations. And we have Molly and Jack, and they're twins. And Molly is gifted this pincushion by her Aunt Phoebe. And this pincushion that's shaped like a pumpkin, turns out it has a little bit more to it than meets the eye. They follow this pincushion through a door in a tree to the possible world, understanding that Earth and what we know is the impossible world. But through this tree is the possible world. And once this pumpkin gets back to the possible world, it becomes its evil self again, because what is going on is there's actually an evil wizard trapped inside this pumpkin. Molly and Jack would like to help their friends in the possible world get rid of this bad wizard. And the only way that you can do that is by looking for this black leaf that comes up. Nobody knows really where it comes up, in whatever field or forest it comes up, but it stays for 13 days and then it goes away and comes up someplace else. But if you find this black leaf, you can transform the wizard back into an inanimate object and send it to the impossible world again. What I loved about this is it's incredibly eerie. I mean, it is about as eerie as you can go for a children's book. I also loved that Molly is a very strong female character. She's resourceful, she's clever, and she's protective of her brother as well, and I love that. I think it's a really great book to read this time of year. So highly recommend. The illustrated version is by Margaret Tarrant, who did a ton of work. She's another real classic illustrator. You might know her. By the way, if you hear that I'm rabbit sitting at the moment, my friend's rabbit is staying with us because she's moving. So she's staying with us for a few days. So if you hear some kerfuffle back there, it's the bunny. But anyway, so Margaret Tarrant is the illustrator, and she has her own flower fairy books. I think the ones that are really popular are by Mary Cicely Barker, but she also has a line of flower fairy books. So now we are in the 1920s, and from 1927 is Freddie Goes to Florida. This is the first book in the Freddie the Pig series, and the series is enormous. There's tons of books in this series. We had a really great time reading this. It's autumn, and the geese are flying south for the winter, and the barnyard animals are lamenting the passage of summer and how cold they're going to be soon. And a barn swallow suggests, well, why don't you guys migrate south for the winter? And so the barn animals get together and decide, you know what, we're going to do that. We're going to migrate south. We're going to go to Florida. And so they go. Some really funny things happen that just make you laugh. Even though it's Freddie Goes to Florida, the truth is it's not actually about the pig, Freddie. It's an ensemble cast of all the barn animals. And I thought that was really curious, but the explanation is that this series actually took off when Freddie the Detective, the third one in the series, was published. So then the publishers went back and changed the names. I believe this one was To and From, I think was the name of it, or something along those lines. I'll put it up if I'm incorrect. And the publisher went back and changed the names to Freddie this and Freddie that. I guess it was just Freddie Goes to Florida. And the second one is Freddie Goes to the North Pole, I think. The author is Walter R. Brooks, and the illustrator is Kurt Wiese. He's a German illustrator. I actually just featured his Jungle Book on my website when I was doing my Illustrator Explorer. I thought the pen and ink drawings were just adorable. There's a scene where the cat is painting the cow, camouflaging him, so that was really cute. But I really enjoyed this, and we want to read the next one in the series, and especially Freddie the Detective, which I hear is really great. It's been recently published by Overlook Press. I'll put a link to this one in the description box if you're interested. So now we are in the 1930s, and published in 1932 is Little House in the Big Woods by Laura Ingalls Wilder and illustrated by the great Garth Williams. We love this book, and even though Laura's on the cover with a doll, this is actually a wonderful book for boys as well, and my son is loving this series. We just read Little House on the Prairie, the third one in the series, last winter, and he really loved it. But we started with this one, and there's panthers and bears and deer and hornets. And this is really a love letter from Laura Ingalls Wilder to her father, to Pa. And so much of this book is about Pa and what Pa is doing, and Pa's history and funny things that have happened in his life. And I know that there are some things in these books that are a little problematic, that are hard to read. In this book, if memory serves, I really only came into contact with it in chapter titled Sunday, when Pa is playing a song on his fiddle, and it's a song that was, I guess, out and about at the time. It has no effect whatsoever on the events that are happening. It's at the very end of the chapter titled Sunday. I think that is the only problematic issue I remember from this book. There's reflections of how people were at that time. So I think it's such a wonderful read, especially as a read aloud, because you're in control and you can skip over any part. Let me show you the pictures. Garth Williams is a very popular illustrator, and here's some of his illustrations. I opted to go with the colorized version just because I love it. I think it's beautiful, but there's that panther. But the black and white is also just as charming. Little House in the Big Woods is set in Wisconsin. I think what I love the most about it is the loving family element. It begins in autumn and it goes around the sun and ends in winter, and the autumn descriptions are really beautiful. It's just a cozy, wonderful curl up with this book read, and that'll make you laugh sometimes. It talks about how they make maple syrup in the spring. It talks about straw hats and how they make cheese, and how in the autumn chapters especially, they're stocking up on their food supplies. So there is some about hunting, and there is some about preparing the meat to get them through the cold winter months. It's just a lovely, good read. So now we are in the 1940s, and published in 1947 is 21 Balloons, the Newbery winner in 1948. This is a book unlike any other book I've ever read. It was just wonderful, exciting, inventive. The book begins in October as Professor Sherman is relating the events of his balloon journey to an audience in San Francisco. He relates what happened to him on his trip, and it's pretty exciting. He comes into contact with an island called Krakatoa. I don't want to give anything away, but it's great for kids who love inventions and inventing things. Written by the French-American author and illustrator William Penet Dubois, whose work I just love. I have his The Light Princess, which I'll talk about in another video, but his illustrations are just fantastic. Here, let me show you one of them. So here is his balloon house. So the house that all the balloons were attached to. It's a really great, fun read. I highly recommend this one from the 1940s. Now we are in the 1950s, and published in 1951 is All of a Kind Family. I actually picked this one up thinking that it was a book about Hanukkah. You know, the end of the year comes and there's so many Christmas books to read, but I also wanted to read a book about Hanukkah, or that had Hanukkah in it. And I guess I fell under that impression because there's a picture book version called All of a Kind Family Hanukkah, which I'll put up here for you to see. So that's why I picked it up. But in the end, it actually turned out to have nothing in it about Hanukkah. But it does cover other Jewish holidays. There's Shabbat, of course, but there's also Purim and Sukkot. One of the major events that happens in this book occurs at Sukkot, which is in September. So I thought I would recommend this for autumn. But it's just beautiful. We follow a Jewish family living in New York City, 5 little girls. And it starts off with one of the little girls not being able to find her library book, and she's got to go and let the librarian know that one of her library books are missing. It's a really sweet read. I mean, there's a lot of lessons in here too about doing your chores and what to do if you get lost. And my son really enjoyed it. You know, we just don't get very many books that discuss Jewish holidays, so that was really fascinating to learn about and to know and to understand. I want to read the second book because I wonder if that's where Hanukkah is, but it was just a really cozy, lovely read, and beautiful descriptions of autumn in it as well. Oh, I forgot to show you. The illustrations are by Helen John, and there's a beautiful Shabbat dinner. So, yeah. I highly recommend this one. The next book is from the 1960s and published in 1964 by the great Ian Fleming, is Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. This version is illustrated by Joe Berger. The original illustrator, John Birmingham, his illustrations are fantastic. But I decided to go with this version because of this wonderful illustration here with the skeleton in the cave that I just thought my son was just going to love. So I decided to go with this version. This is such a fun story. It's about a family of 4 and Commander Caractacus Pot and his wife Mimsy and their 2 children. One day, Caractacus Pot develops a candy that can whistle. So he sells this candy to a candy maker and uses that money to buy a car. And it's a pretty rundown car, but it is not just any car. He fixes it up a little and starts to realize that there's something magical about this car. And the family goes on adventures, and there's a mystery to be solved and some bad guys to catch, and it's just a fun romp. And the reason I recommended it for autumn is because of the skeleton, because there's some scary bits and there's candy. And I just thought that a story with those elements would be kind of fun to read around this time of year. But anyway, we had such a great time reading this. If you enjoy Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, you could also read some follow-up books which are illustrated by the same illustrator, Joe Berger. And those books are not written by Ian Fleming. They're written by Frank Cottrell Boyce. So those should be fun. We haven't read any yet, but I'm keen to. But yeah, just about every page is illustrated, so lots of fun. So now we are in the 1970s, and the book that I have for you is Bunnicula, written by Deborah and James Howe and illustrated by Alan Daniel. We follow a family who goes to the movie theater one night to watch Dracula, and they find an abandoned bunny, and they decide to bring it home with them, much to the consternation of Chester the cat, who is rather frazzled about this newcomer. And he starts to notice some things that he thinks are very spooky about this bunny. And he engages the other family pet, Harold the dog, into his suspicions. There's one illustration that really does a great job at explaining Chester the cat for you and his personality, and it's that one, if you look closely at it, how his shadow is the rabbit. I thought that was pretty cool. But anyway, so Chester the cat is well educated. He reads. He can read all night because his eyes are cat eyes. And there's so many book references. Of course, there's Dracula, but there's also Treasure Island and some Dickens. And Harold the dog is not as educated as Chester, but he just doesn't want to be outdone by Chester. So in his cute way, he always sort of tries to show that he knows just as much as Chester. And it's just a really funny relationship between this cat and this dog. There's even a graphic novel that just came out last year. I'll put it up for you so that you can check out, that we read as well, that we really enjoyed. I loved this version because it's covered in red velvet, and the end papers have all these vegetables that are significant. I don't want to give too much away, but it's such a cute version, fully illustrated. I think it was the 40th anniversary edition. And I love how the eyes sort of sparkle. And who would have known that a bunny rabbit can be spooky? And I thought this was also appropriate because I'm bunny sitting at the moment. Peter Rabbit is his name, and he's over here hanging out with me. Such a great read. I loved it. Okay, so now we're in the 1980s, and the book I have for you, written in 1983, is The Witches by Roald Dahl, and illustrated, of course, by Quentin Blake. And my son and I both loved this. I think this book might have taken first place in my Roald Dahl favorites over Charlie and the Chocolate Factory because it was such fun. It's a wonderful book to read with grandmothers. The story is about a British boy, and he moves to Norway after his parents pass away and lives with his grandmother in Norway. And his grandmother used to hunt witches in her youth. They travel to England and come across a plot that the witches are undertaking that they have to stop. It's really fun and fascinating and fast-paced. And it's a little bit scary in the sense that the witches themselves at one point are rather scary, but it is not as scary as the movies. Either the Angelica Houston or the Anne Hathaway versions are way scarier than the book. The scariest illustration, I'll just show you right here, is this witch. So yeah, when I wanted to read this. I waited until my son was the right age because I didn't want him to have nightmares, of course. But yeah, we just had such a good time. And when we finished this, I wanted to recommend it to everyone I knew. It's actually set in the summertime. So this can be a great book to read for Summerween, but it can also be a great book if you are in the Southern Hemisphere and you're celebrating Halloween in the spring instead of in the fall. So that could be really cool because a big portion of it is set at a beach resort. So anyway, highly recommend The Witches by Roald Dahl. Now we are in the 90s, and I'm just going to go ahead and talk about the book of the 90s. Published in 1997 is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's or Sorcerer's Stone. And luckily, at the same time that we started reading Harry Potter to my son, Mina Lima began coming out with these beautiful versions. So we are just kind of sticking with the publication and release of the Mina Lima versions, and that way I feel like we can give my son the authentic experience that kids from the late 90s and the 2000s experienced themselves as they waited for each Harry Potter book to come out and then waited for the movies to come out, because we'll read the book and then we'll go watch the movie. And usually we will read this book the last week of summer and into his first few days of school in September. However, the next one, The Prisoner of Azkaban, is not out yet. It'll come out October 3rd. So we're very excited about that. And I have a Chamber of Secrets right there. You can probably see where my finger is. So yeah, we loved it and ate it right up and really enjoyed it. I'll just go ahead and show you some pictures though that I thought why I love the Mina Lima version. Miraflora, Mina, and Eduardo Lima were the design group that worked on the Harry Potter movies. And then they formed their own studio and started publishing all these books. And so they're doing some of the classic works like the Wizard of Oz that I showed you earlier, but they're also doing the Harry Potter books. What I love about them is that they do a lot of pop-up and paper art, which I adore. I think it's great and my son loves, but me personally, I just love their illustrations. They're all over the place and they're beautiful. Every chapter will have one full-page illustration. I love reading them this way and my son loves reading them this way. And we'll continue waiting for them to come out. Now, that said, I suppose if it takes them a long time to get the next one after The Prisoner of Azkaban out, then I will have to probably switch to the Jim Kay versions because I don't know how long we'll wait. But if they keep putting them out once a year, we'll stick with these versions because we love them so much. One thing that was also really fascinating to read Harry Potter when you have been reading a ton of classics and other books is that you start to realize how much J.K. Rowling lends from other books. It just so happened that we had recently, right before this, read The Sword and the Stone. You can immediately see how other stories inspired her and gave her ideas, and how she pulls it all together into this story that is unique in its own right and very successful. She's got this marvelous talent for pulling all of the right elements out that kids will love and creating this amazing story. Just really enjoyed this. Love this version. Highly recommend. Speaking of, one of the authors that J.K. Rowling really admired and inspired her Harry Potter is Eva Ibbotson, especially with her Secret of Platform 13. But that's not the one I wanted to show you. Written in 2001 is Eva Ibbotson's Journey to the River Sea, and I have this beautiful anniversary edition illustrated by Katie Hickey, and it is just so beautiful. I love it so much. We follow Maya, who is in school. It's the autumn of 1910, and her parents had died already before the beginning of the book in Egypt, a couple of years before. And her guardian comes one day to their classroom to tell her that they have discovered some family that she can then go live with, a distant relative of her father's. The family has 2 twin girls and they live in Brazil, in the Amazon jungle, and she's completely thrilled. She's accompanied by a governess, Miss Minton, and on the passage she meets a boy named Clovis. And Clovis is in a theater production of Little Lord Fauntleroy. And so there's kind of a mirroring of that novel in this book, which I thought was really lovely. She goes to live with the family, and as it turns out, things are not as she expected that they would be. And it's just a really cool book that my son liked. And I actually asked him, this was on the same list as Harry Potter, and he liked this one better. So it's to this day, I think when I ask him what is the very favorite book of his that we've read, I think he says Journey to the River Sea. So anyway, I highly recommend this one, and this version is so beautiful. There's that I love. And there's animals in it, and it's full of information about botanicals. So now we are in the 2010s, and written in 2018 is The First Pages & Co. Book Wanderers, and by Anna James and illustrated by the Colombian graphic designer Paulo Escobar. And I mentioned this in one of my former videos. I think it was my What We Are Reading This Summer video. And as it turns out, it's set in autumnal London. So that was really nice. So I thought I would put it on this list because we really enjoyed it and had such a good time reading it. In my other video, I had mentioned how I prepared my son for this, or not prepared, but just wanted to read Alice in Wonderland and Anne of Green Gables first because I wanted him to catch the references. But as it turned out, there's very strong reference to A Little Princess. So we'll have to go back and read A Little Princess now. So yeah, there's also other references. There's Sherlock Holmes, Treasure Island, and some mentions as well, like Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief, and Swallows and Amazons, which is another book I have not read yet, but that I keep meaning for us to read. But anyway, so we just had a really great time reading this. It has a very eerie bad guy in it, kind of in the same vein of A Series of Unfortunate Events. I'll show you an illustration so that you can know what I'm talking about. So that's him. And then here's another really pretty illustration that I just wanted to show you of a library with the black cat because it was very seasonally appropriate. We really enjoyed this, and I'm looking forward to the next book in the series, which is The Lost Fairy Tales, I think it is, which is perfect because I love to read fairy tales in the winter time, so maybe we'll put that on our winter reading list. But anyway, so highly recommend. So now we are in our final category, in my second to last book, because I also have a graphic novel I wanted to show you, and I forgot to mention that at the beginning. But anyway, so second to last book from the 2020s and published in 2020 is one of the Vanderbeekers series. So we read The Vanderbeekers of 141st Street last December. One of my good friends had been recommending it for a while, and then also on top of that, the book club that I take part in also read it, so that kind of sealed the deal. So we started reading it, and we loved it so much that we carried on reading these books, and we've been listening to them on audio instead of getting the physical copy. So that is why I have a library copy of The Vanderbeekers, Lost and Found. This is the fourth book in the series, and it's set in autumnal Harlem. If you don't know the Vanderbeekers, they're a family of 5 kids, a pair of twins, and 3 other children, and each child is different. Like, one of them is musical, the other one is scientific, another one is sporty but also loves great literature and loves reading, another one is shy and introverted and loves to knit and make quilts and such. Another one is very sweet and social and just always positive. It's just such a beautiful series, and every book keeps getting better and better, and this one's really great. This is probably, up to this point, one of the heavier books. It's a little emotional. A couple of things are happening in it that really just tug at the heartstrings. It starts on October 20th, and the Vanderbeekers are helping one of the other characters prepare for the New York Marathon. And there is somebody living in a garden shed, and they have to figure out who this person is, and then they help that person. The story kind of revolves around that. And it's difficult to talk about because when you're doing a later book in a series, you have to be so careful about what you say, because I don't want to give anything away to people who are reading the very first one. So I don't want to go too much into it, but it's just a really beautiful read and really tugs at your heartstrings. And so if you haven't read the Vanderbeekers series yet, read it so you can get to this one, because it's a really lovely book. It's not hugely illustrated. It just has some illustrations here and there and some chapter headings, but this one was really cute because it showed the Vanderbeekers and their pets, which I thought was really adorable. So here's a very cute little autumnal chapter heading illustration. Every now and then you get these buildings when it's different parts. So I thought that was pretty cool. Just really love it. It's a very sweet chapter that happens at Halloween, which is really fun. So yeah, highly recommend this. Okay, so that's it for my Read a Book by the Decade. I want to finish this off with a graphic novel that I've just really struck by and just really enjoyed. And that is Beowulf by Zach Weinersmith and artwork by Boulay. And oh my gosh, I just really love this graphic novel. It was fantastic, and it's such a great read to get your kids ready to understand Beowulf later in life when they're studying it in school. So we follow a group of kids who have this amazing tree house, and they are quite naughty and they make a lot of noise in the neighborhood. So understandably, they're frustrating a Mr. Grindle, and Mr. Grindle decides he's going to put an end to it, and he changes a lot of the children into teenagers and adults. And luckily, there is a warrior named Beowulf who comes to the rescue. We had to read it twice because the first time we read it, my son didn't quite understand what was going on. It keeps true to the style of language in Beowulf. It uses a lot of alliterations and a lot of what's called kennings, which is, for example, a river horse would be a hippopotamus, that kind of thing. And so there's a lot of that going on, like Grendel would be hall wrecker. And so you have to kind of pay attention to make sure you're following what's happening. But so the second time we read it, after I explained to him how the original Beowulf is written in this way and how this one is modeling its story using the language that was used in Beowulf, he got it, and then he started looking at it differently, and he totally understood what was going on, and he loved it. And it's just such a beautiful book. Well, first of all, its cover is just wonderful. Let me see, the back is also really nice. So that's really cool. I love it when there's wonderful things under the dust jackets. Makes me so happy. Then we have lovely end papers, and there's the treehouse, which they fondly call Tree Heart. I thought it made a good Halloween read or fall read because there's quite a few references to Halloween. And I loved this page, which showed the kings and queens of the treehouse through the generations. As each kid group grew up, they'd have a new leader. And so now we are working with Roger, who is the current leader of the Tree Heart treehouse. Just lovely illustration by Boulay, who is a illustrator living in Paris. And I also wanted to read to you, so at the very back of this graphic novel, it talks about the history of Beowulf, the history of Old English, and what the language of Old English sounds like. And there's even this one part where it discusses how there's actually different letters in Old English, like the th sound, and that one would make the a sound, and this one would make the sh sound. So they have those different letters in Old English. It went into how Beowulf sort of fell out of knowledge. Nobody really had heard of it until a certain person brought it to light, and I'll just read it to you. Now here's the weird thing. Beowulf is a famous story today, but for a very long time almost nobody read it. And the people who did read it mostly thought it was just some weird old story that wasn't very good. This changed about 100 years ago, mostly because of a man named J.R.R. Tolkien. You may know him as the guy who wrote The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, but his actual job, when he was doing it, was researching old languages and words and stories. Tolkien didn't think Beowulf was just some weird old poem. He loved it. So anyway, I thought that was very interesting, how that it talked about how Tolkien brought Beowulf back. And just some history about the different rewritings of Beowulf as well that happened over time. I honestly think it is a great book to read to prepare your kids for when they get to that eventual school age where they're going to be studying Beowulf. And I just remember studying Beowulf going, what is happening? I didn't know what was going on. It was really difficult to read. But I think if I had a little more background that was presented to me in a fun way, that I would then catch on and appreciate it so much more for what it is. So anyway, I highly recommend this lovely graphic novel. Well, that is it. Thank you for watching, and thank you for sticking around to the end of this video. I know there's a lot of books, so thank you so much for that. This will be the final video in my summer series. I'm going to, I think, change positions and find another place to film for the autumn months. So I'll have that video coming to you soon. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to like and subscribe and to comment. I really love getting comments. So thank you so much to all of those who have already commented. I really appreciate it. And I hope that you have a wonderful start to September, a wonderful autumn, or if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, a beautiful spring. Talk to you soon. Bye.